Understanding the fundamentals of sound itself is the first step in learning about digital audio and sound. Sound is created by vibrations, such as in a guitar string, vocal cord, or speaker cone. These vibrations disturb the air molecules near them, forcing molecules together, raising the air pressure slightly. The air molecules that are under pressure then push on the air molecules surrounding them, which pushes on the next set of air molecules, and so forth, causing an area of high pressure to move through the air. When these pressure waves reach us, they vibrate the receptors in our ears, and we hear the vibrations as sound. When you see a waveform that represents audio, that waveform represents these pressure waves. The zero line in the waveform is the pressure of air at rest. When the line swings up, it represents higher pressure, and when it swings low, it represents lower pressure. This waveform is the equivalent of the pressure waves in the air below. The amplitude of the waveform is the change in pressure from the peak of the waveform to the trough. A cycle is the amount of time it takes the waveform to go from one amplitude all the way through its amplitude changes until it reaches the same amplitude again. The frequency of the waveform is how many cycles it goes through each second, where 1 hertz is 1 cycle per second. That is, a waveform at 1,000 hertz goes through 1,000 cycles every second. A waveform's phase is a measure of how far through a cycle the waveform is. There are 360 degrees in a single cycle, so if you started measuring with 0 degrees at the peak, the waveform would be at 180 degrees at the trough, and back up to 360 degrees at the next peak. The wavelength is the distance, measured in inches or centimeters, between 2 points with the same phase. When 2 or more sound waves meet, their amplitudes add to and subtract from each other. If the peaks and troughs of the 2 waveforms line up, they are said to be in phase. In this situation, each peak adds to the peak in the other waveform, and each trough subtracts from the other troughs, resulting in a waveform that has twice the amplitude of either individual waveform. Sometimes the peaks of one waveform match up with the troughs of the other waveform. The peaks and the troughs will cancel each other out, resulting in no waveform at all. Such waveforms are said to be 180 degrees out of phase. In other cases, the waves are out of phase by some other amount. This will result in a more complicated waveform than either of the original waveforms, as the amplitude at each point along each waveform are added together. 2 simple waves can make a complex wave file like this. Continuing to add waves will make a more and more complicated waveform. When you see music, voice, noise, or other complicated sound represented by a waveform, you are actually seeing the result of adding all the waves from each instrument together. A microphone works by converting the pressure waves of sound into changes in voltage on a wire. These changes in voltage match the pressure waves of the original sound. High pressure is represented by high voltage, and low pressure is represented by low voltage. Voltages travel down the microphone wire and can be recorded onto tape as changes in magnetic strength, or on vinyl records as changes in amplitude in the groove. A speaker works like a microphone in reverse, taking the voltage signals from a microphone or recording and vibrating to recreate the pressure wave. Everything discussed so far is known as analog audio. Unlike analog storage media like magnetic tape and vinyl records, computers store audio information digitally. In digital storage, the original waveform is broken up into individual samples. This is known as digitizing or sampling the audio, and is sometimes called the analog to digital conversion. The sampling rate defines how often a sample is taken. For example, CD quality sound has 44,100 samples for each second of the waveform. The higher the sampling rate, the closer the digital waveform will be to the original analog waveform. You can see the error caused by sampling. If the number of samples in this section of audio is doubled, the curve they represent comes closer to the original analog curve. The sampling rate limits the frequency range of the audio file, because in order to reproduce a given frequency, the sampling rate must be at least twice that frequency. For example, if the audio contains audible frequencies as high as 8,000 hertz, you will need a sample rate of 16,000 samples per second to represent this audio accurately in digital form. This calculation comes from the Nyquist theorem, and the highest frequency that can be reproduced by a given sample rate is known as the Nyquist frequency. CDs have a sample rate of 44,100 samples per second because human hearing can register frequencies slightly above 20 kilohertz. Just as the number of samples in each second of audio determines the resolution of the sampled audio, so does the resolution in the amplitude of each sample. Amplitude resolution is referred to as the bit depth. A bit is a computer term meaning a single number that can have a value of either 0 or 1. A single bit can represent two states, such as on and off. Two bits together can represent four different states. The bits can be 00, 10, 01, or 11. Each additional bit doubles the number of states that can be represented, so a third bit lets us represent 8 states, a fourth 16, and so on. The resolution in amplitude is just as important as the sampling resolution. When a waveform is sampled, each sample is assigned the amplitude value closest to the original analog wave. With a resolution of 2 bits, each sample can have one of only 4 possible amplitude positions. With 3-bit resolution, each sample has 8 possible amplitude values. Higher bit depth means a lower noise floor and higher fidelity. CD quality sound is 16-bit. Which means that each sample has 65,536 possible amplitude values. DVD quality sound is 24-bit, which means that each sample has 16,777,216 possible amplitude values. In summary, the process of sampling or digitizing starts with a pressure wave in the air. A microphone converts this pressure wave into voltage variations. A digital to analog converter, such as a sound card, then samples the signal as the sample rate and bit depth you choose. Upon playback, a digital to analog converter, like your sound card again, reconstructs the waveform by connecting these samples together. When you record audio on your computer, Cool Edit tells the sound card to start the recording process and specifies what sampling rate and bit depth it should use. The hardware that the sound card uses determines the sample rates and bit depths that it is capable of recording. Most cards are capable of recording and playback at CD quality settings, and often at other settings as well, such as a 32 kHz sample rate, which is common for FM radio. Your sound card probably has both line-in and microphone in ports through which it can accept analog signals. The sound card samples the audio at the specified sample rate and assigns each sample an amplitude value. Cool Edit stores each sample in sequence until you stop recording. Once you've recorded the audio, you can use Cool Edit to edit the audio or save it to disk as a file. When you play a file in Cool Edit, the process happens in reverse. Cool Edit tells the sound card that it is going to play a file and sends the samples to the sound card. The sound card reconstructs the original waveform and sends it out as an analog signal from the line-out port to your speakers. An audio file on your hard drive, such as a WAV file, consists of a small header telling the audio program what the sample rate and bit depth of the audio is, and then a long series of numbers, 1 for each sample. These files can be very large, 44,100 samples per second, with each sample consisting of 16 bits of data, is 705,600 bits per second, or 88,200 bytes per second. This works out to 86 kilobytes per second, or more than 5 megabytes per minute. Stereo sound has 2 channels, so CD quality sound takes a little more than 10 megabytes per minute. Then what are Midi files, and why are they so small? In contrast to digital audio, a Midi file might be as small as 10 kilobytes per minute, or a whopping 100 minutes of Midi per megabyte. Midi and digital audio are fundamentally different representations of sound. A digital audio file seeks to exactly represent an audio event, just like a tape recorder, whether it's a musical performance, a person talking, or any other sound. Midi, on the other hand, is more like sheet music. It acts as instructions for the recreation of a musical selection. Midi files record information such as the note to be played, the instrument to play the note on, the pan and volume of that particular note, and so on. When a Midi file is played back, the sound card takes this information and uses its synthesizer to recreate the note on the right instrument. Because every synthesizer sounds different, the Midi file will sound different depending upon what sound card plays it back. Also, a Midi file cannot record sounds that cannot be resynthesized from short instructions, like a voice. So that's the short course in digital audio. There's a lot more to audio on the computer, but now that you know the basics, you will find it easier to understand how it all works. If you still have questions about digital audio, its applications, and its uses on the computer, visit www.cooledit.com.